previous lecture, we had talked about how to compute the stiffness matrix and the load vector for a given model problem using the finite element method. So, what were the essential features of what we discussed in the previous lecture? It was we had defined these global basis functions. Phi, which were given as functions of this type. That is, functions which at the node I had a value 1 and at all other nodes they had a value 0. So, these were so called piecewise linear functions that we had formed. They were continuous, and you can see that they are non-zero only in the elements I minus 1 and element I. So, in element I minus 1 and element I. So, these were functions with local support. One thing that we should answer before going further is, why did we choose these functions? So, if you remember, in the previous lectures we had talked about the problem with point loads, and we saw in that case that the problem with point loads has a piecewise continuous function. Okay? So, piecewise smooth functions which are continuous at points, and the derivatives have jumps at those points. So, that was the motivation for using such functions in the Rayleigh-Ridge method. Now, it is not always obvious what kind of functions we have to use for the given problem of interest. So, we should have some kind of a general mechanism by which we can see what is the minimum smoothness requirement on the functions phi I that we are using to form our global basis functions, okay, before we can define these global basis functions. For different differential equations, you will have different phi i's. So, let us see how to do it. If you remember that we had made our weak formulation of this type, integral x is equal to 0 to L EA du dx and into dv dx, where I will be using v or w as my weight function, and this on the right hand side is equal to integral x is equal to 0 to L f v dx plus, as we had put an end load, p v evaluated at x equal to L. So, this was our the weak form for the model problem that we had taken. So, now let us look at this part. If I look at this part, here you see that this term and this term are sitting in this integral. So, what we want this integral to be finite. So, the integral should be finite. Now, what does it mean? That if this integral has to be finite, then each of these terms du dx, dv dx have to be defined in the domain of interest. So, what we want is, we want du dx and dv dx, they should both be defined in domain omega or I. So, what are the roughest or the least smooth of these functions u and v for which du dx and dv dx will be defined? The answer is very simple, that if you look at this domain, we can have du dx and dv dx being defined means that they can be like this. That is, at particular points some I'll call it point xa, point xb, point xc. At these particular points, the derivatives can have jumps. This is in, if you remember, I am writing it as du dx, dv dx. So if this is the function that we have, then in that case, the integral on the left hand side in the previous page is defined. Anything worse than that, anything worse than this, that is, if I have, in a way, the worse than the jump means that there will be a Dirac delta at these points in the derivatives. That is, in fact, even the u can be discontinuous. So in that case, this integral will be infinite. It will not be defined. So in order to have these integrals finite, we ask the question, what is the worst type of functions that will satisfy that requirement? And the answer here is that functions for which the derivatives have jumps at specific points. That is the reason why we say that, so if the derivative has jumps at specific points, then u and v are continuous in the domain. In such a way that at certain points slopes change. So with this requirement, we ask, okay, what are the functions that can be used in our series representation? Because if you remember, in the series also, we need functions which can capture this kind of a behavior. So the phi i's that we have should also satisfy this minimum requirement of the derivative. So we want phi I for this particular problem, because we want the left hand side to be defined, should also be continuous, or we say it lies in C0. And that is the reason why we took the phi i's as the hat-shaped functions that we had taken. We could have taken them to be smoother, but the smoother functions would not satisfy this minimum condition. And you remember that whenever you are developing a method, that is a method which will translate into a computer program, you do not want to write the program for one particular problem. You want to write it for a class of problems. Class of problems in this case is defined by what? By different types of boundary conditions, different types of body force, and different types of materials. And it turns out that in order to look at a big class of problems of practical interest, we have to talk about the point loads. So in this case, whenever we are trying to write a program, or whenever we are trying to define a finite element method, we would like to cover the solutions for all these types of problems that are of interest. And for the point load, this phi I with jump in derivatives was needed, or with material interfaces it was needed, and it comes out also from our requirement, minimum requirement for the left hand side to be finite. So that is the reason why one chooses one type of basis functions for a given differential equation. We will see later on when we go to the beam problem that these basis functions, the definitions of these are going to change. There again we will see what is the minimum requirement for which we have to define these basis functions. So don't think that this whole process is arbitrary in nature. Everything comes for a particular reason, and the reason is we have to go back to our weak formulation and look at the left hand side, look at the right hand side, and ask the question, what will make this left hand side and right hand side finite? So this is one thing that I wanted to harp on, and that's a very important reason, very important thing that we have to keep in mind when we are doing the finite element method. Third thing that we obtained was, because these functions phi I were locally defined, that is, the phi I was non-zero in only elements I minus 1 and element I. So in that case, what happened is that the integrals were not all non-zero. That is, the stiffness matrix was sparse. not only sparse, it was banded. That is, some of the elements around the diagonal, that is on either side of the diagonal, were only non-zero. Everything else in the matrix was 0. So armed with this, today let us go further and see how do we go and do everything from a computer based orientation. Because finally we are not going to solve this problem by hand. We would like to write a computer program which can give us the answer to this problem. So from this point of view we would like to go ahead. So to start off, let us, if you remember, that I take the ijth entry of the stiffness matrix. So what does it mean? I am looking at the ith row and the jth column of the stiffness matrix. And what do we get for this entry? There are a few possibilities that we have. That is, for I equal to for j equal to I minus 1, what do we have? That for j equal to I minus 1, I will have in the element x I minus 1 to xi, if you remember, it will be equal to Ea phi I prime phi I minus 1 prime dx for j is equal to I minus 1. This is all. That is only in the element I minus 1, this part is non-zero, everywhere else it is 0. Why? Because if you see here, phi I is non-zero in elements I minus 1 and element I, while phi I minus 1 is non-zero in only element I minus 1, but it is 0 in element I. So element I does not contribute. Similarly, let us look at the second possibility. Second possibility is when j is equal to I. So in that case we will get integral over the element I minus 1 phi I prime dx plus integral over element I Ea phi I prime squared dx for j is equal to I. The third case is when j is equal to I plus 1, then this integral becomes xi to xi plus 1 Ea phi I prime phi I plus 1 prime dx for j is equal to I plus 1. And for all other cases it is 0 for all other j's. Okay, you see that only these three entries are non-zero in the ith row, everything else is 0. And you see that for the ith row, the I minus 1th column entry, the ith column entry and the I plus 1 column entry are non-zero. This is the structure that we will have for all i's. Okay. Similarly, what will the fi be? That is the load vector. It will be equal to, because phi I is non-zero in the element I minus 1 and element I, so xi minus 1 to xi f phi I dx plus integral xi to xi plus 1 f phi I dx. Now plus we have p phi I at x equal to L for our model problem. Let us ignore this part for the time being. That is, for the time being, let us forget this thing. We will see why. I mean, you should be able to know the reason why. You note that of all the phi i's, only for, because we had taken a 6-element mesh, that is for I is equal to 5-element mesh n plus 1, or for our model problem I is equal to 6. For that case only, the phi I at x equal to L is 1. All other phi i's are 0 here. So this part P into phi I is only going to contribute to F6, that is in the general case to Fn plus 1. To all other Fi's it is not going to contribute. That's why let us keep it out for the time being. We'll handle this later. So now we have this part of the load vector, and if I go to the previous page, this part of the stiffness matrix to handle. So how do we go about handling this? So one thing that we will do is we'll try to compute these integrals, because you see that they are limited to elements I minus 1, I or I plus 1 at the most. So we'll try to compute them using the element level integrations. Why? Because these are summation over the elements, as we had done in the previous lecture also. The integrals are obtained by summation of the integrals over these elements. So let us now go to a very important part of the finite element method, which is called the element calculations. So for these element calculations, what do we do? So let us draw certain pictures. In finite elements, one has to draw pictures. There is no way out. So let us look. I ask the following question. I give you element L. That is, this is element IL. For this element, what are the nodes that will be the end points of this element? They will be x, L and x, L plus 1. Okay. So first thing that I am going to do is, since this element has 2 nodes, I am going to give them a local number, a local name, these nodes. What I am going to call them? I will call them as x1 of element L, this node. And this node is equal to x2 of element L. So for each element, I have an x1 and x2 which are representing the 2 extremities of the element. And x1 for the element L will be equal to the global node xl or the coordinate, and the x2 will be the global node x L plus 1. So this, you see, we'll give it a name, this guy. This is the local node number and coordinate. And this is inherited from a global number. That is, it is inherited from here. So there is a one-to-one correspondence between these local nodes and the global nodes. Another thing that we'll do is, let us now look at the function phi I. Which of the phi i's are non-zero in this element? The answer, we have given the answer many times over. It is these 2 functions. So this is going to be phi L, and this is phi L plus 1. These are the only 2 phi's which are non-zero in this element. So what we are going to do is, we are going to now give them again an element name. That is a name when I am in this element IL. So what name will I give? Quite natural. I am going to give it the name N1 of element L. and this one will be N2 of element L. That is, you should remember that this phi L in the element IL is equal to N1 of the element L. Similarly, phi L plus 1 restricted to the element L is identically equal to N2 of this element L. So what are these N1s and N2s called? These N1s and N2s for the element are called the element shape functions. So these N1L and N2L are given a name called the element shape functions. What you would see in most of the books is that they start from this N1L and N2L. Remember that this N1L and N2L are nothing but the phi L's restricted to the element IL. Okay. So once we have these element shape functions N1L and N2L, then you see what we are doing. We are defining everything with respect to the element. All the global quantities that we had, we are defining them with respect to the element. Okay. So now tell me, what is N1L and N2L? So it's very easy. N1L will be equal to what? Since it has to be 1 at the point x1L and 0 at the point x2L, so it will be x2L minus x divided by h of the element L. That is the size of the element L. And remember that HL is equal to x2L minus x1L. That is, the size of the element is HL given by x2L minus x1L. And note that here what happens when I put x1L, that is at the point x is equal to x1L, I get N1L is equal to 1, and at the point x is equal to x2L, N1L is equal to 0. Similarly, N2L is equal to integral, since it not integral, since it is 0 at the point x1L and 1 at the point x2L, it is equal to x minus x1L divided by HL. As simple as this. And this is nothing but the phi L, N1L is the phi L and N2L is the phi L plus 1 in the element IL. Okay. So we have defined what these element shape functions are in terms of the element coordinates and in terms of the element size HL. Okay. So once we have defined these, then we ask the other question: what is the finite element solution? What is the representation of it in this element IL? So we have, if you remember, we had in the generic case un plus 1 x is, we will also call it as, I will call it with different connotations different places. This will be equal to what? Again the question is, which of the phi i's, if you remember that u Fe is equal to sigma I is equal to 1 to n plus 1 ui phi I. So the question is, which of the phi i's will be non-zero in this element? The answer is, it is going to be phi L and phi L plus 1. So what we'll get? U Fe in the element will be equal to UL phi L plus U L plus 1 phi L plus 1. Now we know that this phi L in the element is equal to N1 of L, and phi L plus 1 in the element is equal to N2 of L. So this UFE in the element IL is equal to UL into N1 of L plus UL plus 1 into N2 of L. Now, these are UL and UL plus 1 are global quantities because they were defined with respect to this series. So, now we will give them a local name, that is an element wise name. So, this we will represent as in the element, this is U1 of L, and in this element this guy is U2 of L. So, you should remember that UL is equal to in the element U1 of L, and UL plus 1 is equal to in the element U2 of L. So, what do we have? UFE restricted to the element L is equal to U1 of L N1 of L plus U2 of L N2 of L. Okay. So, these guys are called, they have to be given a name. These are the element degrees of freedom. The UIs in the finite element connotation globally are called degrees of freedom, while in the element they are called the element degrees of freedom. Okay. Now, we will ask the following question, that to which of the Kij's does the integral from the element contribute with a non-zero entry? So, the answer is that, because the answer is directly related to the phi i's which are non-zero in the element. So, it comes that for rows I and I plus 1 row globally, and for these rows, which columns? So, the columns will be I minus 1, I and I plus 1 column. So, these rows and these columns are the ones to which the element contributes. So, what we see is that the element contributes to the ith and the I plus 1th row of the global swiftness matrix K, and to the I and I plus 1th column. So, let us now look at these contributions. So, what are these contributions? So, what we have is that for the ith row, the element contributions will be integral from since we are talking of the ith element, okay, so it will be x I to x I plus 1 EA phi I prime phi I prime dx. This is going to be non-zero. Similarly, xi to xi plus 1 EA phi I plus 1 prime phi I prime dx. This is going to be non-zero. Similarly, for the I plus 1th row, What are going to be non-zero? Xi to xi plus 1 Ea phi I prime phi I plus 1 prime dx and integral xi to xi plus 1 Ea phi I plus 1 prime phi I plus 1 prime dx. So you see that these are the 4 entries in the global stiffness matrix to which the element contributes with non-zero entries. So what we are going to do is, we are going to call these entries, we are going to write in the form of a matrix. And this entry, the first entry, will be called K11 of element I. Second entry will be called K12 of the element I. The third entry will be called K21 of the element I. This two, and the fourth one will be K22 of the element. Tell me, why am I calling it K11, K12, K21 and K22 of element I? Because in the element, if you remember, I can replace the phi I with n1 of the element I prime. Similarly, I can replace phi I plus 1 with the n2 of the element I prime. So for a given element, you see that naturally this will be nothing but the first integral will be Ea n1 prime n2 prime, second entry will be n1 prime n2 prime, sorry, the first entry will be n1 prime, second one will be n1 prime n2 prime, third, for the second row, the first entry will be n2 prime n1 prime, and the second entry of the second row will be n2 prime n2 prime. So naturally this comes in terms of the element convention as the matrix K for the element I is equal to K11 of element I, K12 of element I, K21 of element I, K22 of element I. And this will be equal to, let me rewrite it again, integral. Now I am rewriting the integrals all in terms of the element quantities. So it will be integral from x1 of the element I to x2 of the element I, Ea n1I prime n1I prime dx. And the second one will be x1I to x2I Ea n1I prime n2I prime dx. And the first entry of the second row will be x1I to x2I Ea n1I prime n2I prime dx, and x1I x2I Ea n2I prime n2I prime dx. This is all. This matrix, if you remember, I had given it a name, is called the element stiffness matrix. and in this case the element stiffness matrix is a 2 by 2 matrix because only 2 of the phi i's are non-zero in the element. All other phi i's are 0. If there were more phi i's, which we will see later on, which are non-zero in the element, so many, the matrix size increases by that much. So this is the element stiffness matrix, and you see that we have computed now the entries of it. What we had done in the previous page, we have simply rewritten in terms of the element connotations that we have introduced. So they are given in terms of the element level entities. So let us now go and use this for a particular problem. So let us take the case where EA is as a function of x is equal to EA is equal to constant. Okay, so simple thing. So now what do we have? So we will have, remember that we need the derivatives of n1 and n2. So let us take for the element n1i the derivative for the element I, the derivative of n1i, this will be equal to what from the definition of n1i. So let us go back to the previous pages and see the definition of this function n1. So you see that if I take the derivative of this expression n1, then it becomes minus 1 by HL. The derivative of n2, here it becomes plus 1 by HL. So let us go further and introduce this. So this becomes equal to minus 1 by h of the element. Similarly, n2 of I prime is equal to plus 1 by HL. This is some very interesting properties. You should check for yourself that n1i at any point x in the element plus n2i at the same point in the element is equal to 1. And if you look at this thing here, this expression n1i prime plus n2i prime is equal to 0. So in a way this is a check for what you are computing. So if your n1i plus n2i comes out to be non-zero, you know there is a problem in whatever you have done. And similarly, if n1i plus n2i is not equal to 1, then there is a problem. n1i prime plus n2i prime is not equal to 0, then there is a problem. So these are some small checks that we can incorporate in whatever we do. Fine. So using this, let us now go to our element calculation. So what will k11 of element I be equal to? It will be equal to integral x1 of I to x2 of I EA, which is now a constant for this particular case in example that we are taking. Now n1 I prime is equal to minus 1 by HL. Again n1 I prime is minus 1 by HL dx, and this expression, the integrand is a constant. So this will be equal to, when we integrate, EA into 1 by HL squared into x2i minus x1i. But what is x2i minus x1i? It is equal to HL. So this will be equal to EA into 1 by HL. So the k11i came out to be EA by HL. So let us now calculate k12i. This will be equal to integral of x1i to x2i of EA n 2i prime n 1i prime dx. This is equal to integral over x1i to x2 of I EA into 1 by HL in HI into minus 1 by HI dx. So this will be equal to, again by doing this integration, it becomes minus EA by HI. Actually, for the previous expression also, it is not EA by HL, it is EA by HI, because we are talking of the ith element, not the lth element. Okay, so this is what K12I is. So by the same token, if we do the same job for the next row, K2I will be equal to minus EA by HI, and K22I will be equal to EA by HI. So these are the 4 entries of the element stiffness matrix we get. So what does the element stiffness matrix become? K for the ith element is equal to EA by HI into, we have 1 here, minus 1 here, minus 1 here, 1 here. See, this also is symmetric. So the element stiffness matrix is also symmetric. You see that we have formed a recipe for the ith element. So now it's very easy to do this job for any of the elements, because all you need as far as the information is concerned is the value of the EA and the size HI of the element. Once you have that, then this together gives me the element stiffness matrix. So I don't have to do this computation repeatedly. So I do it once, and this structure can be used for all the elements. That is one of the beauties of the finite element method, because the shape functions are so defined that the structure remains uniform in some way. Similarly, if I am looking at Fi, that is the contribution to the load vector. So this is element load vector. This will be equal to F1 of I, F2 of I, and this will be equal to integral from x1 of I to x2 of I, F n1I dx, and here also integral over these limits F n2 of I dx. Let us take the case that fx is a constant. As an example, let us say it is equal to f0. So then what does this become? So here we will get f1 of I, f2 of I is equal to f0 into integral over the element and this, after doing the integration, it's quite easy to show, is equal to f0 into hi by 2 and f0 into hi by 2. So now we have obtained all the entries of the element stiffness matrix and the element load vector. Sure, the question is now which of the global equations it is going to go to. So imagine that I started from these element calculations. That is, I defined these element shape functions, found the element stiffness matrix and element load vector. I would like to know that which of the global entries they have to be added to. So that for that we need so-called the local to global enumeration or numbering. And which we have already stated that the local 1 for the element maps to what? Globally it maps to I. Local 2 of the element maps to the global I plus 1. So the job is very simple. We know which of these global entries I have to add these local entries to. So what do we do in terms of, remember our job is to form the global stiffness matrix K and the global load vector F. And what we have done is we have done the integrations over these elements. Now we have to add them together to form the global entry. So tell me, for the 6 element mesh that we have taken, for the 5 element mesh, so let's say n is equal to 5, and also let us assume that all the elements are of the same size, that is it's a uniform mesh, that is hi is equal to h is equal to L by n. Let us take this particular case. So for this particular case, for the choice of the EA and F that we have taken, can we form the global stiffness matrix? So what do? We first make all the entries. So the global stiffness matrix will be of size 6 by 6 or n plus 1 by n plus 1. So we are first going to make all the entries of this global stiffness matrix 0. This process is called initialization. That is, I set the values to 0. Then I start looping over the elements. See, I am talking in terms of a computer program. So I start looping over the elements and adding the stiffness entries and the load vector entries from the element to this global K and global F. I am also going to initialize all the entries of F to 0. So let us do that. So here I have this big K matrix. So from the first element, the first and the second entries of the element go where? They have to go to the first row and the second row and the first and the second column, because for element 1 the global phi's which are non-zero are the phi1 and phi2. So here will come K11 of element 1. Here will come K12 of element 1. This is all that the element 1 contributes to the first row, that is the first equation. Similarly, in the second equation it will have K21 of element 1, K22 of element 1. So the element 1 entries go to the first row, first column and second column, second row, first column and second column. Let's go to element 2. Where will it add up? So element 2, if you see, the phi 2 and phi 3 are non-zero in element 2. So where will the K11 of element 2 add to? It is going to add to this one, K11 of element 2. Similarly, you will have K12 of element 2 here, K21 of element 2, K22 of element 2. Then I go further, look at element 3. For element 3, phi 3 and phi 4 are non-zero, so it only contributes to the third and fourth rows and the third and fourth columns. So third row, third column will have K11 of element 3, and similarly here I will have K12 of element 3, and then here I will have in the fourth row I will have K21 of element 3, and here I will have K22 of element 3. This way I can keep on adding. So I will then add, I will have K11 of element 4, K12 of element 4, K21 of element 4, K22 of element 4, and so on. So if I now write this 6 by 6 matrix after doing all this, so the global matrix K becomes equal to EA by H into, what do we get? Here I will have, the first entry will be K11 of element 1, which is 1. Next one will be minus 1. Okay. Then what else? Is there anything else which is going to be there? Answer is no. So all other entries 3, 4, 5, 6 will be 0. Similarly, in the next row I will get minus 1 here by substituting the Kij's from the elements. Here I will get 1 plus 1, 2. Here I will get minus 1, and everything else is going to be 0. Here the first one, in the third equation, you see that phi 3 and phi 1 are, there is no point in the domain where they are both non-zero. That is, phi 3 is 0 in element 1 and phi 1 is 0 in all other elements. So by that token, the first entry will be 0, and as we have done it in the previous page also, that's what it comes out to be. Second entry will be minus 1, third will be minus 2, minus 1, 0, 0. So I continue the process, 0, 0, minus 1, 2, minus 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, minus 1, 2, minus 1, and the final equation 0, 0, 0, 0, minus 1, 1. So this is the global stiffness matrix that we were after, and you see very nicely by doing the computations at the element level and adding them up in this global matrix, I formed the global matrix. This whole process of doing the computation at the element level and then adding up these entries in the global matrix at the right locations in the global matrix using the local to global enumeration is called assembly. And in the computer program you can see it very clearly. Essentially you have to write a do loop where you start looping over all the elements, get the element entries, add them up in the right locations in the global matrix, and that is the whole assembly procedure. Okay, so I have assembled the global K matrix. Let us now assemble the global F matrix. So global F will be equal to what? So you see that phi 1 will only be non-zero in element 1, so it will be F1 of element 1. Here phi 2, so F2 of element 1 plus F1 of element 2. Here I will get F2 of element 2 plus F1 of element 3, F2 of element 3 plus F1 of element 4. So let me erase this part. I will go here. Then F2 of element 4 plus F1 of element 5, and then I'll get F1 of element 5. So this is my global assembly of the load vector, and we have already done the computations at the element level, so it's very easy to do it here. So what do we get? F1 of I is equal to, what do we have? F0 into H by 2. Here I'll have F0 H by 2 plus F0 H by 2 because all elements are of the same size, so this becomes F0 H. The third one becomes again F0 H, fourth one becomes F0 H, fifth one becomes F0 H, and the sixth one becomes F0 H by 2 because it only gets contribution from one element. So this is nothing but the assembly of the load vector. Okay. So now you should see something, that I have deliberately not touched the boundary conditions yet. So how do we now go and apply the boundary conditions for the problem that we have? So again, let's take this particular problem, that u is equal to 0 at x equal to 0, and here p is equal to Ea du dx at x equal to L. So now you see, the first thing that we'll do is we'll apply the natural or Neumann boundary conditions. How do we apply it? So you see here that this also corresponds to the global node 6. And remember that if I have all these things, only phi 6 is non-zero at the point x6. So if you remember back what we had done, we had to add p phi I evaluated at x equal to 6. So only for phi 6 we will get that expression equal to p into 1, because phi 6 is equal to 1. For all other phi i's, this expression is going to be 0. So what do? We find out, see, in any problem, you may have the load condition applied at any of the two ends. So first of all, you find out which end this load condition is applied at, or at which node. We may have a concentrated load at the center, and as we had said, that wherever this concentrated load is applied, that has to be a node. So which node we have? Here we are going to modify f to be, so f0h by 2, f0h, 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 and the last one f0h by 2 plus I will add p. So here what we do is, this Neumann boundary condition is applied by simply adding this term p to the corresponding row of the load vector. So this is how the Neumann boundary condition is applied. In the next class, next lecture, we are going to talk how to apply the Dirichlet boundary conditions. This is a little bit more involved, and see, we have not yet applied it in a problem. We know that out of the Dirichlet conditions, u1 should have been 0. So how do we impose u1 is equal to 0? So once we have done this, then we have essentially given the outline of how to go about doing a finite element computation. And also I have given you hints as to how we should progress with the programming of all this in a computer program. It doesn't matter which language, but the various blocks or the building blocks or the subroutines or the functions that will be involved in the computer program should come out of this kind of a discussion. And later on we'll see that how does this help. That is, if I have to improve the accuracy of the solution, what do I have to do? How can it be done easily? And how can I increase the order of approximation, which we have not touched here, to get better approximations also.